Thank you, Senator Paul and fellow senators, for this opportunity to share our family's ordeal. I'm so sorry for you because we've gone through everything that you've gone through, and it is enormously painful. My parents, John and Gisela Pazgai, are Hungarian freedom fighters who escaped their homeland in 1956 after the invasion crushed the Hungarian Revolution, the Soviet invasion. They came here as refugees, seeking freedom with just the clothes on their back and no English language skills whatsoever. My parents worked tirelessly for over 50 years, and they built a small business called Pazgai's Garage in Morrisville, Pennsylvania. People brought to us their broken cars and their trucks and their heartaches. Our business cards always read, "You break them, we fix them." Our shop held out a lot of love and goodwill to everyone. My parents worked 7 days a week. They built an excellent business. They sent both their daughters to college. That was their main goal. And after they had finished that major feat for them, they decided to expand their business and try to build a bigger shop to employ more people in our very small town with a very dying economy. So in 1986, my parents bought and purchased an unofficial community dump across the street. It was basically a vacant piece of property that everyone threw their trash on. It was a vacant 14-acre lot, zoned commercial, filled with thousands of old tires, junk, and debris, and it was an eyesore for over 30 years. My dad wanted to build a truck shop there. We got a permit, a legal permit from the Department of Labor. The local DER said we were good to go. We were not on the National Inventory Wetlands map. They said even if we were, that we would be covered under nationwide permit number 26 for up to 10 acres of isolated wetlands. My dad mortgaged our home, and we bought the property. We cleaned up the site. Instead of the county thanking him for removal of all the debris, which we paid for ourselves, the Army Corps in 1988 and the EPA sued both of my parents in federal civil court for putting clean topsoil on our property, getting ready to build our building. They also, at that time, unbeknownst to us, did flybys and planted a video camera in our neighbor's home to spy on my dad's everyday activities. A few days later, the U.S. Attorney in Philadelphia had sent out several armed federal EPA agents. They surrounded my dad in his shop, arrested him, hauled him off with handcuffs to federal criminal court in Philadelphia. He was not given a phone call, he was not given an interpreter, and my mother had no idea who had taken my father. I had called the local police, the state police, searched for my father frantically. My mother said this brought back terrible memories of the Soviet soldiers coming into Hungary and taking some of her family members and never to see them again. Finally, I contacted the civil court because that's where we were being sued by the Army Corps and the EPA, and they told me that the EPA had made our case criminal, and that was before the civil court ever had a chance to make a ruling. They told us basically, bring your checkbook, your dad doesn't need a lawyer, and we'll arraign him. I called a neighbor who was an attorney. We raced to the courthouse. We bailed him out. Afterwards, two EPA agents searched our home and businesses for illegal firearms. They turned everything upside down. It was basically like watching people burglarize your home and not being able to do anything about it. By the way, they found no firearms because that was a bogus claim, as I contend to this very day, so is their wetlands claim. The Army Corps and EPA began spinning their tale of federal regulated wetlands on our isolated property because we were adjacent to a drainage ditch that somehow, according to them, miraculously was connected to the Delaware Canal, which it is not. They switched maps and locations. They misread and misdirected officials to wrong coordinates. They lacked correct elevations. They falsified forensic soil data. They lacked soil DNA. And they manufactured a bogus wetlands delineation lacking proper aerials, and as was testified by our soil scientist, Mr. Carl Eby, who was a former Army Corps of Engineers. And he had testified also that he was very, very upset with the way that they handled the case altogether. These agencies, EPA and Army Corps, could not even agree on a clear definition of what wetlands are or where they were on our property. My father cleaned the stormwater drainage ditch and removed about 5,000 tires. And since that cleanup, Our home and our properties have not been flooded, nor has our neighbors' properties for the past 25 years. At every point, we kept asking the Army Corps and the EPA, how could we make this work? At one point, our Army Corps agents demanded that we pay money. We thought they were soliciting a bribe. We later learned that is their mitigation extortion game. We knew this was a terrible misunderstanding. They had wrong addresses, wrong maps, wrong elevations, wrong topography. It turns out we have 2 streets in our town with the same names, and these agencies kept flip-flopping the information one for the other. After our trial was over, and we were tried during the Christmas holidays, we were found guilty on New Year's Eve, December 1988, of 40 counts of violating the Clean Water Act for filling a so-called wetlands with non-toxic clean fill. We were given the maximum fine, $202,000, and my father was sentenced 3 years in prison, the longest jail term in history for any environmental crime, even more than Exxon Valdez for the Valdez oil spill. The Wall Street Journal backed us up. My dad was allowed to be free on bail till we went to appeals. With the help of Paul Kamenar from the Washington Legal Foundation, we appealed our case to U.S. Court of Appeals and then to the U.S. Supreme Court. Solicitor Ken Starr was forced to concede in his brief that the connections to interstate commerce was inaccurate and admittedly thin, but the court denied us a review. I think we were 20 years early, and considering U.S. versus Rapinos, which now limits federal wetlands jurisdiction to those with surface water and connections to interstate waterways. By July of 1990, we were bankrupt. The day after Thanksgiving of 1990, my father began serving his sentence in Allenwood Federal Prison. He was the sole supporter of my family at that time. My father served 1.5 years of hard time and spent another 1.5 years in a halfway house. He was given 5 years supervised probation. Our fine was later reduced, thanks to Paul and the Washington Legal Foundation, because of another appeal, and basically that was brought down to $5,000, because we had, at that time, a negative net worth. During the time my father was incarcerated, the government ordered restoration. They dug up 10 acres of our 14-acre site. They moved and removed twice as much as our said violation. They dug pits and ditches all over our property. They dug a hole that they said would become a wetlands pond, which after 10 years was still high and dry. In 1989, property rights was finally a word that we were allowed to say, and he was recognized by different groups. In particular, my father won the 1996 Champion of Liberty Award from the Pennsylvania Libertarian Party. After that, in 2000, we were asked to testify before the House Committee of Government Reform, chaired by Congressman Dan Burton. My dad got a standing ovation and an apology from the chairman on behalf of the government and their behavior in our case. However, the Army Corps, the local group, didn't show a kinder face. Instead, they continued their vendetta, and they sued us once again after that hearing, and they dug up several more acres, nearly 20 years after our first so-called violation, and attempt to create a non-viable wetlands pond out of an exempted storm drainage ditch. Roughly 12 years after our initial Freedom of Information Act for request of documents, we have found that the Army Corps and EPA thwarted our every effort for a permit. They said we needed one, but then they internal memoed each other and said, don't even give him a permit application, which they basically stonewalled our engineers, our lawyers, and it was just, ring around the rosy. Currently, we are in legal limbo. We have an appeal that has been stayed while we are in settlement talks. We can use our property basically for parking, which limits my parents to sustenance income. Senator Paul and fellow senators, I'm so grateful that you're doing what you're doing here today, and I ask that these agencies be financially compelled to compensate landowners for any land use loss out of their own budgets, and maybe they wouldn't be so heavy-handed in calling people's properties wetlands or trying to confiscate them. I believe the permitting structure has to be seriously relooked at. I think it just simply must be overhauled. I also believe their regulatory authorities should be restricted severely. They should not be allowed to run roughshod over people's property rights. I was very concerned, as the other families that have have spoken out about even coming here today, because I know what the government can do. I know what they have done to my family, and they do retaliate. And it's also painful just to go back. I mean, we have 25 years we've been doing this. But my dad is 79 years old. He's on his deathbed. Today, he was given last rites, and they said they don't anticipate he'll make it through the evening. But he'd never want us to give up. So when my dad was able to speak, I said, Daddy, if we could ever get the rights to use this land, what should we do? And he said, you know, build a hospital, fix people like me. So that's what we'd like to do. You know, we do have dreams for this property still. We'd like to partner with an Alzheimer's and autistic research group and build a learning and living facility. We have 14 good acres. And then honor my parents' fight and offer some healing on a piece of property that's given us and the community a lot of loss. These agencies may have turned our American dream into a nightmare, but I believe as long as people are willing to stand strong, the Constitution will prevail, and there is hope for the future. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to thank both families for coming, and particularly the emotion involved with this, Victoria, and we wish your father well.
Thank you.
One of the things that strikes me about both cases, and particularly your father's case, Victoria, is he was told, I think as recently as a few years ago by a court, make the property like it used to be. And it's like, what's he supposed to do? Put 7,000 tires back out on the property, make a mess out of it, throw a bunch of old cars out on the property? He improved his property, and he's being told to make his property like it used to be. What an insult and what an absurdity. I think every problem and every horror story has a solution. So we're going to try to be part of the solution, and we have a bill that we're working on that will change the definition of what a wetlands is. Interestingly, my staff says that there is no statute that uses the word wetlands, that it comes from regulatory law, but there's no congressional statute. It's derived from something called navigable waters. But tell me how the Sackett's property, what kind of boat are you going to put in water that's not there? And if there was a pond, can you put a boat in a low area of land that only collects water when it rains? You know, we need to redefine this and make it explicit. In the Rapulanos case that went to the Supreme Court, I think it was 4 to 4 to 1, and they did define what navigable waters should be or what wetlands should be, but I don't think that's been enacted in the statute. But we are going to work on a bill specifically on wetlands, and we are going to try to define the government off of your property.